Um, so how many of you are in this situation? You share responsibility with somebody else to get something done, but you're not in charge of them. They're not in charge of you. But what you get done depends on what you do together. How many of you are in that situation? How many of you are leaders, managers, executives in that situation? Yeah. If you're not in that situation, I don't have anything at all to share with you. I've spent the last 25, 30 years asking the question, how do I behave when I'm in a situation of shared responsibility with other people to get something done, but I'm not in charge of them, they're not in charge of me. Today, everybody I know is in that situation. And we all wish that we could just have an individual job, independent of anybody else, and actually do our own work, or at least many people do. But so many people are discovering, wait a minute, people and interactions is the work, communication is the work, interruptions are the work, conversations are the work. And yet we have this single point accountability focus on business. So what I'm going to do today is probably fry your mind a little bit, or at least I hope so, because I've spent almost 30 years looking at a train wreck coming, and the train wreck is now here. And that train wreck is that all of our ways of structuring and thinking about work primarily are in the vertical in terms of hierarchy and accountability. Yet how we get things done is in the horizontal. And I noticed that, like I said, almost 30 years ago. I've been trying to figure out what are the best tools to help people understand how to make that transition. Today there is a huge push to move or sell Agile up and into the organization. So the promise of this session is to share with you my thoughts and what I've learned about maybe why that isn't the best approach, maybe why that isn't working as well as we would like, and maybe what we could do differently. So how many of you are in a role of trying to move Agile up and out? Are you? Okay, good, thank you. And how many of you find that painful? More hands than even people in the role. Okay, good. So have you ever felt like you were really clear about something, but you weren't sure how to communicate it so it was clear to others? Have you ever felt that way? Anybody? Yes? Well, I'm there right now. So I've got about 3 hours worth of things I need to do to get you the information I want to get you in this hour and 15 minutes. And so I'm a little unclear about things to do first. So I'd like you to help me decide how I prioritize the things that I have to do. The main message that I have for you is this. Those of you who know about my work in the responsibility process, what I call the leadership gift, know that for me it's about leadership, mindset, and culture over processes, tools, and structures. Which means that the change has to be a change of leadership and mindset that seeps into the culture. And I know how to do that. We've had success doing it. So I can spend time on 3 different things here with you, and it really depends on your depth of interest and your depth of understanding of the first one, which is I can spend time telling you about my research on the responsibility process. This is the first how-to approach for understanding ownership, personal responsibility, understanding how people avoid it and how people take it, and the role that it plays in work. So how many of you, first of all, would you raise your hands if you've had a really good, thorough introduction to that from me before? Yeah, so like less than a quarter of you. So we probably need to spend a fair amount of time there. The second thing is I've got an inventory of alternative approaches that don't use the word agile, but they share the dynamics of agile. In other words, they share the value and the benefit of agile. And I'm going to present that to you, and I've got it in a zip file that I'll post on my website and give to you later as well. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on that, and then you're going to tell me which of those we want to dive down into, and I'll tell you a little bit more about those methods. And the third thing is, let me ask you this. Would you like a quick overview of how to build a culture of responsibility rapidly in an organization of any size? How many of you, if you'd like that, raise your hands? More. Okay. Thank you. So this is going to be a little bit disjointed, but that's important in order to feed you what you want. So I'm going to start here. So the whole Agile enterprise buzz started 4, 5, 6 years ago. And the questions started rising. Do you think we should go Agile? Should we go Agile? Is Agile for us? And it occurred to me that that's the wrong question. And the reason it's the wrong question is because it's taking this term Agile and it's turning it into a thing, like a package, a noun. It's nominalizing a whole bunch of stuff into one thing, Agile. And we've also seen that there's a lot of resistance, especially in large, older companies, to Agile. I know of lots of folks who have had experiences with executives saying, don't use that word anymore. We don't want to hear about that. Now, I think that's changing. I think the resistance to Agile is starting to go down, so this may be a temporary phenomenon. But in terms of should we go Agile or should we do Agile, I think the better question is not whether or not Agile is for us or should we do Agile. The better question is this: are you exposed to change, complexity, and uncertainty? In your job, in your role, in your department, in your team, in your function, in your business, in your market, in your environment, are you exposed to change, complexity, or uncertainty? For how many of you are you exposed to change, complexity, and uncertainty? And for the people you're trying to sell Agile to, what would their answer be? Yes? Yeah. Okay, so if you are exposed to change, complexity, and uncertainty, then guess what? There's a growing 4, 5, maybe 6-decade body of knowledge about how to survive and even thrive under conditions of change, complexity, and uncertainty. And there are many approaches to it, but it's all based on the same fundamental idea, which is from complex adaptive systems theory, which says that there's only one successful approach to uncertainty. And do you know what that is? Who knows what it is? There's only one successful approach to uncertainty. Adaptability. Pardon? Adaptability, right? But what's the action? Confront. I heard confront. I like it. Thank you. What the literature says is iteration, right? Discovery and learning through the feedback that comes from iteration. So if you're not working in an iterative manner, then you're shooting yourself in the foot in terms of dealing with change, complexity, and uncertainty. I have found that it's much easier to talk to people about dealing with change, complexity, and uncertainty, especially people who don't want to hear more about that Agile stuff. The second thing I realized is that if you're working in an environment of change, complexity, and uncertainty, it means that you have to work fast. So I use the language of get real fast, and you can accent it either way. Get real fast, or you have to get real fast. And what that means is you have to, as you know, learn and grow. I mentioned to you 30 years ago seeing that the world was changing in terms of getting things done horizontally. What this little slide shows is that how we think about managing before the world got complex was pretty much completely through hierarchy. And it's still the dominant mental model. So if you think about it, we've got probably 5,000 years of accumulated knowledge in the world and accumulated mental models, language, linguistics about hierarchy. And we've got a world that's gotten from fairly stable to fairly complex over about 3 or 4 decades. So how work really gets done today in a complex world is horizontally, not vertically. And yet the mental models for teamwork, collaboration, networks, value streams, help me think of maps, of the mental models that we have are young. They're crowded out by the more dominant models of the last 5,000 years. Yet they will be chosen by the market. So I think that this horizontal way is obviously going to win. The issue is that we've got in our minds, in the minds of people that you work with and are trying to sell to, we've got 5,000 years of accumulated language and symbol systems about hierarchy, and 30 years of accumulated knowledge about teamwork and collaboration and value streams and nets. So this is a challenging proposition to deal with. All right, let me see if I can make this work. So an issue many of you are dealing with, years ago I started calling it the Agile Ghetto, and today I think the better term is islands of software. So the issue is that we've got different contexts. So the idea of Agile Ghettos is that I saw it before Agile. We used to call it team ghettos, and that's where management says that teams are really good for you folks on the front lines doing service delivery or software or whatever it is. So we've got this team-based activity, lots of self-organizing, lots of personal discipline and freedoms about who we talk to about what in order to get things done on the front lines. But we'll stay in silos here in the business executive functions. And what happens is in between there's like an inversion layer. And that's because there's 2 different contexts for getting things done. And this inversion layer makes it tough to get anything across in terms of truth or honesty or information or trust. How many of you have witnessed that situation? It's pretty challenging. And so what we do is we take a specialist in the organization, we put them there at that inversion layer in between the Agile groups and the business. And we ask them to translate back and forth. And these people might be your scrum masters, or they might be first line supervisors or project managers. And what happens is they just end up looking dumb or silly to people on both sides. Why? Because you have 2 entirely different contexts, 2 different cultures for how we think about work, how we make decisions, how things get done, how we communicate, disciplines for working together. We've got the horizontal network value stream culture or context, and then we've got this silo culture or context. So we call this the wall. And there used to be simply the wall between silos. But then we brought one of the big problems with Agile was that it was developed in software development and not developed in business. And we have difficulty now moving out of software development, even though it has very little to do with just software development. Agile is simply a way of thinking, which I'm going to get to showing you. And so we have this new kind of wall, which is the Agile Ghetto frontline context, and then this inversion layer between it and the rest of the organization. So the pain that we've caused for ourselves now is that we have a number of different contexts in the same organization which we're trying to get work done. And what I know works is when we have one context for thriving in change, complexity, and uncertainty. And I've been testing this over the last about 8 years with a variety of different clients where the question is, can we really perform highly as an entire organization if we have completely separate contexts for how we operate in different parts of it? And usually the leadership comes to a conclusion that no, we can't. And the early days of this started with leadership asking themselves, so if we were going to apply the Agile Manifesto to ourselves, what would that look like? So more on that a little bit later. So today, as I alluded to, if you were in the lunch session, I alluded a little bit to this, but I'll repeat the whole thing. Today I get to address a lot of management groups, a lot of executive groups, and I tell them that through no fault of their own, they are steeped in a way of thinking and an executive skill set that's obsolete. And it's obsolete because there's this 50-plus year lag in our society in education between the time that a good idea is proven and applied and the time that it's adopted widely and widespread through any domain. And so in management and in management education and in executive development in organizations, essentially the state-of-the-art, the best practices being taught today are still linear deterministic thinking rather than iterative thinking. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. So I get to tell executives that it's not about their tools, it's not about their processes, it's not about changing a structure, it's not even about changing a process, it's about changing the fundamental way they think about solving a problem or about planning or about making a decision or about doing strategy or anything else. And if they don't want to change, that's fine. That there's an entire cadre of extremely disciplined, young, agile thinkers who are much better managers than they are because of your discipline in being able to ask yourselves every day whether or not you're adding value, your discipline in being able to prioritize, your discipline in being able to gather feedback, your discipline in being able to collaborate with others to get things done, and a variety of other disciplines that you're really good at. That makes you a manager, makes you good at organizing. So I say there's an entire cadre of great young agilists that are coming along that will be happy to take your job, but for a little bit of domain experience. Or you can retool. And it's really not that hard if you want to retool. It'll take a little while, but you can do it. So what I tell them is to replace right and wrong thinking with empiricism. So you and I have grown up in a world that every time there's a problem, every time there's a need, every time something's not right, we've been taught to say, what should I do? Or what's the right answer? What's the right thing to do? And what I'm here to tell you is that there's a place in our minds beyond should and shouldn't and beyond right and wrong. Yet you and I are steeped in should and shouldn't, and we're steeped in right and wrong. And the place beyond that is the place of design. It's the place of creativity. It's the place of innovation. And that's what part of the responsibility process is going to show you. So hang on to that thought for a minute, because we have to replace right-wrong thinking with empiricism. And let me tell you why. How many of you spent years believing something was right and then found out it wasn't? Yeah. So this is painful to understand, but we have to get past it as rapidly as possible because that's the only way we can get real fast. The other thing, of course, that I tell executives is to replace endless analysis with experiments. And I'll have a little bit more about that right now. So for those of you who are in management leadership, what time box controlled management experiments are you running right now? Is anybody running any? Are you?
When I leave the office for a day.
Yes? That's an experiment when you leave the office for a day to see what happens?
Yeah.
Good. So you've probably heard that the only place left for true competitive advantage in your organization today is in its culture and in its strategy and how you organize. That your competitors can replicate most of your IP and reach your customers. And so the only way that you can beat them is to out-organize them. And that's done through culture. So that leads to some thinking where a lot of folks think that the place where we most need innovation today is not in the lab, it's not in R&D, but it's in management. And as Ken Schwaber said at lunch, if you were here, the agility applied to business is not taking a template and making every business look the same. Agility applied to business is deciding for yourself what you're going to change, at what pace, and what you're going to look like. So the other thing that I tell executives is to start experiments, start safe-to-fail experiments, time-box controlled experiments. I have a colleague, some of you may know him, Dan Greening. He's a Scrum coach, and he calls Scrum a controlled production experiment, where every iteration is an experiment and the controls are the iterations that came before. So something to think about if you're a leader. And I challenge executives to ask themselves, what percentage of my effort is adding value? And how do I know? And the most important question there is the second one, right? And most executives don't know how to answer the question. They simply assume that they are, or that they have the right or the privilege to be doing so. And I tell them that the people working on the front lines in their development organization using Scrum and Agile are answering this question every day. And if our frontline people are answering this question every day, then why shouldn't our leadership, why shouldn't our executives be asking this question every day? Which means, what feedback loops do you have built in to your day-to-day activities that let you know what percentage of your time and effort is actually adding value? So this is getting to the idea of empirical leadership. So here's that 50-year lag problem of the linear deterministic thinking. If we look at this image with the gold or the yellow off to the left representing the planning and analysis cycle, and then the red on the right representing the execution or the implementation part, we know that this is the very traditional linear waterfall deterministic approach that business has taken for eons to getting things done. It's deep in our psyche, deep in our psyche. I am fairly senior in terms of my career, and I had to relearn this. I had to admit to myself a number of years ago that this was deep in the way that I thought, and you guys taught me how to think differently. So what's important here, of course, is analysis, getting it right, and efficiency. And of course, it never ends executing. So we know that in a world of agile thinking or iterative thinking, dealing with change, complexity, and uncertainty, we know that the planning and analysis part is parallel to the execution or operations part. And we focus on empiricism, learning, and effectiveness, and we call this value-driven or adaptive. So that's all review for you. We know that this is done through nested feedback loops and iterative loops. Here's the important part. The important part is that most of what you've learned about change is based on that period of history from the pre-complex era, where change is seen as a noun. Remember I talked about the problem with should we go agile is we're nominalizing the term agile, we're calling it a thing. And when we say that change is hard, change hurts, people resist change, we must overcome change, we're thinking of a big shift, that type of change, change as a noun. But in the world of iterative thinking, change isn't a noun at all. Change is a verb. Change is constant. Change is what we're doing through the process of discovery and feedback and learning. And so the thinking that we want to change, to get change squared, I guess. The thinking that we want to change is from change as being hard to change is the work. Constantly changing and learning and experimenting and constantly moving towards more and more value is the work today. Almost 10 years ago, I think it was, can't remember, it was one of the Scrum founders that said that we ate change for breakfast. And today I have clients who are in executive management that eat change for breakfast. And change is not hard, change is the work. changes the process of learning and iterating and experimenting. So the theme behind all this is that it's not about mechanics, it's not about processes, there's no one right structure, there's no one right template, that it's putting dynamics, people dynamics, thinking dynamics, interaction dynamics, before mechanics. And what that means is that if we want to get agile at scale, if we want to get the adaptive learning organization, what we really are looking for is we're looking at scalable behaviors and not scalable processes. And those scalable behaviors are the things that I told you that you're already skilled at, that you're wanting other people to get skilled at, which is, do I know how to prioritize? Am I adding value? Do I know how to go talk to the right people about the right impediment or the right problem? Do I know how to collaborate, etc.? So, remember that issue about vertical versus horizontal? Well, it turns out that the problem that I've been working on now for many years is that accountability and responsibility aren't the same thing. And accountability is how we design and manage work. Would you agree? Generally, the reason for hierarchy is because we've got more work than one person can do, so we hire other people, we divide the work up, we delegate it, and then that process is called managing what? Would you say managing accountabilities? Have I put you all to sleep? No? So generally, accountability is the way we manage work. We manage role accountability, we define it, we measure it, we have a performance management process. Responsibility is different. Responsibility is a feeling of ownership. Responsibility is subjective. Responsibility is internal. How many of you have given accountability to somebody for something but they didn't feel a sense of ownership and they did a lousy job or it didn't get done at all? Or things happened and they didn't respond to what happened? Yeah. So these two things interact in a really interesting way, and most of the mental model that we have for getting work done is through the accountability process, holding people accountable, which, by the way, is also more negative and more punitive-minded. Right? Somebody once asked me if there's anything positive at all about holding someone to account. So it's got a negative kind of connotation, where responsibility is about emotions, it's about feelings of ownership, it's about feeling resourceful, about knowing how to respond when things go wrong. It turns out that the psychology of responsibility and the language of responsibility has to do with what you and I do when things go wrong. So how many times a day does something go wrong where you work? Right. Yeah, and what do we have all those meetings about at work? Right? Crisis meetings and things going wrong. So my experience is that the nature of how people respond when things go wrong is far more important to high performance and success and happiness and agility at work than whether or not we know how to hold people to account. So real quickly, let me introduce you to this research that I've been part of for a number of years. Years ago, I was trying to figure out how to teach software project leaders how to build teams. And I realized that what high-performance dynamics are all about is about when a group of people feel such a sense of ownership for the project or the initiative that it changes how they treat each other. So they go beyond what they've been asked to do. The experience is its own reward, and they tend to perform very highly. And I called that shared responsibility. It's when people step up to shared responsibility in a way that, that they feel a sense of personal ownership for it. It's not something that you can create through hierarchy or through reward systems. And so I went in search of what is responsibility and how does it work. And I found a research program that started in 1987 that was teasing out how personal responsibility works in our minds. And so I joined the program in 1991, and I've been a part of it ever since. And we have now I've got 22 years of applied research on the front lines of leadership and product development on how personal responsibility works, how you can teach it, how you can take it, how you can coach it, and how you can build it into a culture. Briefly, it turns out that personal responsibility has to do with what happens when things go wrong, because when things go well, we're in flow, and we just enjoy being in flow. But when you get knocked out of flow, and you get a result that you don't want, you get this little bit of upset, you get this little bit of frustration, this little bit of anxiety. And when you get that anxiety, what happens in your mind is a cause-effect analysis kicks in. And your mind wants to know why this happened to me and what to do about it. And it turns out that this cause-effect analysis is driven by emotions, and it's driven by a set of mental states that are progressive mental states. You can get stuck at any state. And the lowest state is the state that I call lay blame. So the idea of lay blame is that something's just gone wrong. So I use the example of I can't find my car keys. I'm reaching for my keys where I always keep them. I've got an appointment to go to, and I reach and they're not there, and my thought is, who took my keys? They were right here. So the who took my keys is a blame, right? And you've been told your whole life you shouldn't do it, but guess what the research says? It's your first thought, if you're human, every time something goes wrong. Right? So how many of you haven't in the last week walked through your house, if you live with a partner, and said, honey, have you seen my computer, sunglasses, keys, smart pad, whatever, backpack? And honey says, yes, dear, right where you left it when you came in yesterday. Right? Now, are you telling me the question, have you seen my thing, wasn't just a little bit accusatory? Right? So we've been told we shouldn't do it. Our research says that it's the first thing every human does when something goes wrong. How many of you have a lot of blame at work? And would you say, is that value or waste? It's waste. It's wasted time, it's wasted thought, it's wasted action, but it's human. That's probably the important thing that I want you to think about here. If you get off of blame, your mind goes to a little bit more diffuse search. Instead of a particular culprit, it justifies. It says, well, it's the weather, it's the economy, it's the culture. That's the way it is around here. It's the way management has always been. That's the way management will always be. In this cause-effect analysis, what's happening, it's actually very sophisticated. What's happening is you're in the position of effect in the cause-effect analysis, and the mind is saying that the effect is out there. So it's either a culprit in terms of lay blame, or it's a set of circumstances, and circumstances are always beyond your what? Control, right? What happens in our minds, you and me and every bright person you know, and even the not so bright people, is if we're in this mental state when we're doing an analysis of why we got this result that we don't want, the premise is that there's nothing I can do because the cause is where? It's out there. Yeah, so we've been told our whole lives that we shouldn't do this, but we still do it because we're humans. So how many of you have a lot of stories at work? A lot of excuses, a lot of justifications about why we can't overcome problems or impediments? Do you? Yeah. Value or waste? Waste. All right. So if for some reason we refuse to buy the answer that our minds are giving us, so some people say don't believe everything you think. Right? So if I have a thought about it's a set of circumstances beyond my control, and I get off of that thought, the next thing that happens is that I feel bad. I call this shame. I'm the dummy, I'm the dolt, I'm the stupid one. Gosh, when will I ever learn? Somebody take a gun and shoot me. Geez, how could I be so dumb? I'd ask you if you know this self-talk, but I know the answer. You're an expert at it. Every one of us are. And the reason is that there's like this sorting routine in our minds. And it's looking for cause-effect. And if we don't buy the blame, and if we don't buy the story or the justification, then it switches the internal-external variable in cause-effect analysis. And so now not only are you at effect, but you're also at cause, and you realize that you had some doing in your own demise, and that's when you go into self-pity. The premise here is that there's something wrong with me. That's the premise in shame. Now, it's a different color because society's taught us that if we're doing this, we're being responsible. We're taking what? Responsibility. I did this. I'm the dummy. Here's the issue. The primary activity in shame is self-loathing, not learning. Right? So value or waste? It's actually waste. Yeah. But we've been rewarded for doing it. Most of the should and shouldn't statements in our world map to feelings of shame. What should I do? Right? And so remember a little bit earlier I said we're taught right and wrong and we're taught should and shouldn't. And I've decided that those are no longer really valuable questions. They're actually wasteful questions in my way of thinking. If we get off of shame, the next thing that happens in the mind is that we feel trapped. So we feel like we have no choice. This is the mindset of obligation. And the mindset of obligation is the mindset of have to, don't want to. So I have to put up with something I don't want to put up with. I have to do something I don't want to do. I have to live with some result that I don't want to live with. It turns out that the professional, intelligent, well-paid populations in our society, mostly you and I around problems, hang out in these two places, obligation and shame. So if you're wondering if you have some of this obligation, I'd ask you this question. How many of you have some really dumb meeting, not this one, that you have to go to? Have to go. Dumb meeting, horrible meeting, have to go. Come on, admit it. It's a stupid meeting, you wouldn't go except you what? Have to, right. How many of you have some dumb paperwork you have to do? Have to, stupid paperwork. How many of you have to go to your in-laws for holiday? Have to. Right? So obligation is simply the mindset of feeling trapped, feeling like we have no choice. And you and I and our society that we work in is full of this. And what's interesting is that it's not the ultimate mindset. In fact, obligation is the way we design work. Historically, people say to me, Christopher, what's wrong with people coming to work out of obligation? We're holding them accountable. That's the way we design work relationships. And society teaches us that if we're doing what we're supposed to do, if we're being good, if we're keeping our agreements, if we're doing the right thing, that we're being, quote, responsible. What my research shows is that when you and I and the people we know operate out of a mental state of obligation, our performance is barely adequate to get a pass. So how many of you know lots of people at work just putting in the motion because they're trapped? They're not happy, they're not enjoying it, they're not highly motivated, but if they don't come to work, they don't get a paycheck, so they come to work and put in the minimum necessary to get by. They're not bad people, are they? They're just human, right? And they're responding exactly as you and I are designed to respond when we're feeling that way. The other thing about obligation is it stores up this toxic stuff that we call resentment. And it builds up and builds up and builds up till we explode if we don't know how to get out of it. So it turns out that personal responsibility is really just another mental state. And there's this series of mental states that every one of them are available to you and me and everybody we work with. Every time something goes wrong, every time you've grown in your life, you've gotten to the top of this state because the mindset of responsibility is a mental state where you feel free, you feel self-empowered, you feel resourceful, you generate choices, you know what you can do to move forward towards what you want. You know how to create the next step towards what you want. You know how to take ownership of the situation. Hang on just a second, okay? And the interesting thing is that below this line, these are just coping mechanisms that are hardwired into the psyche. It's how we deal with crap when we don't know how to get the learning, when we don't know how to grow, when we don't know how to make a new choice to move forward. And above this line is learning and growth. So everything below the line, while it's natural and human, it's actually waste. And above the line is value. Question?
So I was just thinking through your justify versus obligation.
Uh-huh. Justify, we do justify all the time, you and I. So you're looking for a difference between justify and obligation?
An example that would illustrate this.
Sure. So I can't find my keys. And I think to myself, who took my keys? They were right here. And then I do a review of my time track for the last hour in my mind since I came to work, and I realize nobody's been in my office. So it actually knocks me off of blame. And my next thought is, well, no wonder I can't find my keys. When I came to work, I was doing 1,000 different things, and the door was open. I thought I'd been burglarized, and the room was a mess. But it turns out that a branch came through the window, and the windstorm made a big mess. And certainly anybody in this situation could have lost their keys, couldn't they? Couldn't they? Yeah. So justify is how we tell a story or an excuse about the circumstances beyond our control that makes it just that we have this problem. Right? It justifies me as important and special and stressed and busy and ambitious as I am, why I would have this problem. It's just a story. Obligation is a mindset where we feel that we're screwed, right? That we have no choice. I have to stay in this dumb job. I have to go to this stupid meeting. I have to go to my kids' event for school or church or play. I have to, right? So it's interesting that you see a relationship, and they're kind of similar, aren't they? Yeah, they're sort of similar. So I don't want to dwell here. I want to get on to the other things that I told you I wanted to spend some time, but it's important to get this baseline because this has become the most important information I know and have to share about leadership, culture, mindset, performance, success, happiness at any level. It's what gives me the biggest gains in the work that I do with individuals, teams, or organizations is when we start learning and applying this. So there's a couple of other positions. And by the way, if you want in-depth on this, my website is full of stuff. On my speaking page, there's a complete hour-long video of me on this stage last year at this time doing a total talk about this. So I invite you to explore that. There's an escape valve called quit, which is when the anxiety of obligation and shame is too great that we don't know how to take ownership, we don't know how to get the lesson, then we check out, we disengage, the mind actually tries to escape, so we call that quit. And denial is just before you thought you could go through a day without problems and struggles. So this is called the responsibility process. And the issue is that the way we're designed, whether designed by an amazing God or whether we climbed out of the primordial ooze and we mutated in this direction, the design is that we've got 5 or 6 ways to respond to upset that are wasteful when it comes to learning and growing and responding to complexity and change and uncertainty. And we've only got one way that's resourceful. You know, if it was up to me, I'd like to design 5 ways that we can be responsive and only one way that we can be in denial or resistant or coping. But it turns out that this is the way it is, which means that if you want to apply this, what you want to do is to create an inner observer, start observing your own mental state and how you're responding to problems. I'm going to tell you how to do that. So the 3 keys to responsibility, if you want to, so most people who learn about this want to know, well, what do I do about it? And the what to do about it is this. Intention, awareness, and confront are 3 keys that you can practice for the rest of your life. And you simply turn on an inner observer. You start to observe your own attention, your own focus, your own mindset. The first key intention says that you create an intention to take 100% ownership for your reality. And if there's something about your reality you don't like, there's only one person who can change it, and that's who? It's yourself. So intention is having an intention to take responsibility, have an intention to get to the top of that process in your mind around every single upset in your life for the rest of your life. So awareness is developing an awareness of what it's like to be you when you're in each of these other mindsets, when you're blaming, justifying, beating yourself up, feeling trapped. The more you can generate an awareness of that and combine it with your intention, you actually graduate upwards in this model. Yes, sir?
What if, this references almost your opening statement, but what if you can get to this level of responsibility and ownership, and your next major issue is to get someone else there?
Well, interestingly enough, that's the first thing most smart executives want to know. So the question is, what if you can get yourself there and your next desire is to get somebody else there? Yeah. So generally what I say about that is be a little bit patient, because it's 1,000 times easier to see the responsibility process in people around you than it is to see it in yourself, right? And the number one question that I get asked by people who've just learned this, smart people, powerful people, is they say, wow, now I understand why I'm at responsibility and I'm surrounded by all these people that damn, what do I do about them? Right? Now, you tell me, where is that person's mindset right there on this chart to ask me that question? Right, that person's standing there saying, I'm responsible, and they're saying it from a mindset of blame. Right? So these are all definitions of responsibility. So the first thing I would tell you, sir, is I have an answer for you. I have a course of study for you about how to do that. I'm not trying to sell anything. There's 400 posts on my blog. But the fastest way to change responsibility in other people is to demonstrate it yourself. That's the number one answer, right? So, and then you have to teach it, and then you have to invite them to apply this for themselves. Because what you're doing is you're overcoming what society has taught us responsibility is. Responsibility is doing what you should do and doing the right thing, right? And should and shouldn't is at shame, and right and wrong is at obligation on this chart. So I don't know if you're following me here in terms of culture, but what I want to do is to build a culture that can rapidly get beyond should and shouldn't and beyond right and wrong, and get to asking ourselves, what do we want? Which is the most resourceful, most responsible question you can ask. If you're going to write anything down during this hour and a quarter that you spend with me, I'd write that down. When you have a problem, when you have an upset, the most important question you can ask yourself is, what do I want about this crap? Right? Look at this crap I have. What do I want? Question?
Does this pair well with Jacaro's window? Are you familiar with that principle?
Did you say the Johari window?
Jacaro window, yeah.
Jacaro window.
Yeah.
Johari window.
Yeah.
Okay. Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, the more you do this, the more you're going to be aware of how you handle stuff. Yeah, it pairs well, very well. So I mentioned intention, awareness. The third key is confront. Confront means that you're actually willing to face impediments and realize that maybe you don't have a perfect bead on society. Maybe there's something that you get to learn or improve or correct or change. So confront doesn't mean to be negative, doesn't mean to get in other people's face. It means to look yourself in the mirror and say, how do I need to expand my comfort zone in order to be able to solve this problem or this issue? And these keys are done iteratively and incrementally. So you start small and you build up big courage and big power by doing it over and over and over again. So I call this the leadership gift. And I call it the leadership gift because you were born with it, because every act of leadership taps into it, because we need extensive amounts of leadership in every team and organization. I don't mean leaders, I mean leadership at every level. And every act of leadership faces the anxiety of the problem or the moment and tries to see what's real and takes action to move progressively forward. And I call it the leadership gift also because you were born with it, but most people don't know how they have this in them. And now after the last 25 years of research, we know, wouldn't say we know exactly how to take and teach and understand personal responsibility, but we know a whole bunch about how it operates. And we've had a tremendous amount of success with individuals, teams, and organizations learning and applying this, even kids. So we've made this point. So I'm going to come back to this in a moment. So let me now, let me go back here. I kind of glossed over this. So if iteration is the only effective response to uncertainty through feedback and discovery, and if we've designed Scrum and Agile processes to iterate, and if we designed the original plan, do, check, act process from quality to be an iterative learning process, then what I and a number of other people believe is that perhaps this responsibility process that's in you and me is the onboard empirical process in every human being, except it's not intellectual, it's actually emotional. Which means that the more humanity we bring to work, the more we bring to work a learning culture that allows for mistakes, as long as the mistakes are met with learning and with taking ownership and correction and improvement, the more we allow each other the ability to actually blame a little bit and justify a little bit and realize we're human, and we go off until we can get ourselves back into a mindset of ownership and come back and demonstrate ownership, then we have a far healthier, far more effective team and culture. So now, let me go to this idea of alternatives to. Well, first, let me take your questions about that, and let me go to this inventory of empirical concepts. So I went through this kind of quickly. Any questions about the responsibility process or keys to responsibility and the role it plays in leadership, mindset, and culture? Up there, yes.
I just had a question. I know some people are hesitant, especially leadership roles, and being open about the mistakes that they make. How can you get them to own up to their responsibility without them jeopardizing their credibility?
Can I ask you a question about that? Is that a problem for you?
No, but I'm sure it would be for higher up executives. They don't want to admit that they're wrong or that they've made a mistake without jeopardizing their credibility.
Do you sometimes not want to admit that you're wrong or that you've made a mistake?
I'm sure everybody does.
Yeah, we all do. Absolutely. So my experience is that the more I practice this, the more people are willing to see themselves as human, and the more they're willing to actually acknowledge the fact that they made a mistake, because they realize the faster they do that, the faster they can learn and grow from it.
So for them to help others and conform to be more owning responsibility more, they should admit to their mistakes and show them how they're growing from them to get others to be more responsible too.
Well, you use the term should, and I tend not to use shoulds and shouldn'ts. I just show people how the responsibility process works in their own minds and invite them to take a look at how they can grow the fastest when things go wrong. Right? So one of my concerns about our approach right now to education and management in organizations is that we have tons of people that are sure they have the right answer, and we tell each other exactly what they should do. And that gets us, in my model, that gets us stuck below the line. So what I have to do instead is I have to teach that person how personal responsibility works in their minds and how they can put that to use so that they'll discover for themselves how rapidly they can learn if they're just willing to acknowledge to themselves their own mistake or their own error. So I opened up here, I'm glad you asked the question, I opened up here asking about how many of you who are in management are running an experiment. Every time we have significant changes in organizations, what I notice is there's a communication about it that we discovered that something had changed or something needed to change, so it wasn't right, and we're going to change it, and now it's going to be right. And then we hope that it doesn't go wrong. And of course, there's no structure or no process or no arrangement that's going to stay right forever. True? So why shouldn't it simply be an experiment for now, that when we discover that it's no longer working, right, we're going to change the experiment? So that comes all the way back to taking ownership for the fact that there is no right structure, no one right way. And it's going to help you with your concern about people admitting their mistakes. Other questions about the responsibility process? Keys to responsibility over here, yes.
Yeah, kind of piggybacking off what she said, have you run into situations, like I kind of thinking about this whole model and stuff, and I've noticed certain types of personalities that get a lot of positive reinforcement organizationally from being really good at either laying blame or justifying. I don't even really know if I have a question so much as, is there any insight in how to change an organizational culture, or at least where to start, to where you can kind of shed light on that and maybe show that it is waste? Because that's just an observation I've kind of made, I guess.
Yeah, I'm looking at my watch because I want to prioritize the 15 minutes that we have left. I can show you how I've been very successful in doing this. And so let me run through this idea of alternative approaches to empirical thinking that we can help leaders with without using the word agile. And I'll invite you to go download this from my website. And there's hot links in this PDF that you can follow all of these things. So, excuse me for starting at the end. So, what this is a partial inventory of empirical organizing concepts. And my notion is that we don't need to sell certain tools or certain processes up the ladder. What we need is to get a couple of handfuls of high-level, top-level leaders to start actually embracing empirical, iterative thinking rather than linear, deterministic thinking, and that the responsibility process is the fastest, most powerful way I've seen to get people to do that. After that, then there's a number of other concepts here. I've quickly categorized these concepts, and this is completely biased, subjective to my thinking, according to management, leadership, mindset, culture, process, strategy, and structure. Those are those little words up the top right. And so going down the rows, for each one of these, I've ticked off where it seems to apply in these various organizational concepts. So you can see lean applies to management, leadership, mindset, culture, process, and now applies to strategy in terms of entrepreneurship and lean startup. The short cycle is the PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act. So where that applies, agile thinking is mostly mindset, culture, and process. Beyond budgeting, I would highly recommend to you, if you don't know about that, I would highly recommend that you look at that. It's a complete leadership concept about organizing that says that the static budget is pretty problematic and that there are ways to operate beyond budgeting. And it's a set of 6 leadership principles and 6 process principles. I think it's pretty powerful. It's kind of trickling slowly around the world. But it's more of a thing that starts at the top or starts higher up in an organization. So if I were trying to sell Agile, I would consider introducing people to the notions of beyond budgeting. My idea of change as a verb versus change as a noun, the idea of complex systems, Cynefin framework, which is getting around in Agile, that looks at systems as stable or complex or complicated or chaotic, and we want to match them with the way that we organize and think. Daniel Pink's book on motivation, emergence as a metaphor, the idea of experiments, feedback loops, flow, focus on finishing rather than starting from lean, iterative and incremental, Kanban, leadership for learning, lean startup book, learning, minimally sufficient language for process and structure, the idea that anytime we put in more than minimally sufficient process or structure, we actually get less responsibility and more cost and more waste. Nameless Organization Change is written by a friend of mine, one of the most brilliant books I've seen on organization change, that says the moment you give a change a name, you create resistance that wasn't there before. So how many of you have been part of a huge initiative that we give a name to, like Quality Deployment 2010? We put up the banners, right? And everybody in the organization groans. And so, if you are in executive role, I would challenge you that when you're trying to create some new ability, some shifts in thinking, some change, rather than give it a big name and a big marketing rollout, instead, why don't you start experimenting and just focusing on performance improvement rather than selling the thing? And I bet you'll see much less resistance. And maybe the less resistance will allow you then to incrementally grow it at a more rapid rate. So my own work, prioritizing pull versus push. Rapid results is the second big thing that I would bring into executives. It's something that I use in my own work. Rapid results is a 50-year discovery process from Schaefer Consulting in Connecticut about large-scale organization change that's done with the same dynamics that you understand. And that is that they say instead of trying to redesign an entire large system and shift it, why don't we see if we can get one small piece of the system working in the way that we want it to work in 100 days? So they talk about 100-day projects. Well, that's just a slice and a sprint, right? It's just a thin slice and a sprint, except it's at the organizational level. And then they say, let's mine the learning from that and then do another and another and another and another. So working with them, we see this as a strategic management tool that keeps an organization continually fresh and continually changing, rather than thinking that we can put a certain structure in place and keep it there for, until it needs to be reorganized. We're constantly refreshing the entire organization through this process. It's a most important tool that I use in organization change everywhere. Retrospectives. Rockefeller habits, you should know about if Rockefeller habits is the leading lightweight management framework for fast growth management of a closely held business. It is, all it is Scrum, and it came before Scrum and came out of the same complex adaptive systems. So when Vern Harnish, the founder of this framework, when he was introduced to Scrum, he thought that was pretty interesting. If you go read the Rockefeller habits, you'll just understand it so well. So if you have an executive team that's resistant to Agile, well, how about Rockefeller habits? Servant leadership, Simply Effective is another book from Schaefer Results about how complexity replicates itself in organizations and the cost of that and what you can do to constantly be simplifying. So the idea of sustainable pace, teams, tribes, etc. Now, hopefully I kept your interest long enough to get down to the count. Here's the important thing, is of these things, 29 of them map to the notion of management or leadership. How many of them map to structure? Yeah, 2. And I think if we stretch it, we can map 20-some of them to process. For me, the important thing here is that most executives think in terms of structuring something, drawing boxes and charts. And I think the big nut that we have to overcome here in terms of empirical thinking at the leadership level is that it's not about structures, it's truly about scalable behaviors and mindset. As I said, I'm going to make this available to you, and I'll show you where in a minute. I can also show you the beyond budgeting stuff, but you wanted to see how to create a culture of responsibility. So here we go. So I've spent 20 years pursuing leadership gift mastery, my own, and how to build it into teams and organizations. Essentially what mastery means is recognizing your coping behaviors as rapidly as possible and getting off of them and getting to a mindset of responsibility where you can generate resourcefulness. My belief is that the brain is what's happening in the mindset of responsibility is that you're accessing more complex reasoning pathways. You're accessing the mind's stochastic reasoning, probabilistic reasoning. So you're much smarter, you're much brighter when you're in the mindset of responsibility. And when you're in the mindset of blame, justify, shame, obligation, I can imagine those images of the brain, going dim. The logic in those mindsets is very simplistic. And so that's why we want to get into the mindset of responsibility. So how do we develop that mastery? Well, it turns out that the number one technology for changing habits, and what we're trying to do is change coping habits. You and I have been trained to cope, and the reason that people get rewarded for blame and justify and all of that is that our society essentially is based on various conditioning. And if you weren't rewarded for blaming, not only if you didn't get away with it, but if you weren't rewarded for it at some level, you wouldn't do it, right? Yes, so you and I are all conditioned to blame and to justify and to beat ourselves up. We get especially rewarded for beating ourselves up. That's why we loathe and self-pity. And we get rewarded for saying that we have to do this stupid thing. Oh, you poor baby, I'm so sorry. I hope someday you get to do what you want. So this is all conditioning. So what we've learned is that the way to change any habituated behavior, the most successful technology in the world for changing habituated behavior is the technology of a support group, which means that you form a group of like-minded people who are trying to change the same behavior that you're trying to change. Whether it's Alcoholics Anonymous or Weight Watchers or Jenny Craig, the support group is the place where we know how to do habit change. Our support groups we call mastery groups. And a mastery group is simply getting a group of leaders together. So what I do is I tell executive A that wants me to change group B that group B isn't the problem. The problem is the one trying to hire me, and I'll be happy to work with group B, but I want to work with you, executive A, first, and I want to work with your team, and I want to do mastery group with you. So I try and come into an organization as high as possible and do mastery groups. And mastery group is a group of leaders who meet together on a frequent basis, maybe monthly, and they bring their upsets, they bring their frustrations, and we actually practice the art and science of breaking through. So we recognize where we're stuck, and my job, or one of my coach's jobs, is to ask the right questions that help to apply the intention, awareness, confront cycle and break through. And it only takes about 10 minutes for most pretty powerful breakthroughs in one of these mastery groups, and create newfound resourcefulness and newfound learning in the group. So when one person in a group does this, then they tend to experience pretty rapid growth, pretty rapid personal transformation, and feel much more resourceful, much more powerful, know how to break through their problems, know how to get to responsibility faster. When a team does it together, then we're solving real-time problems in this study group. They are demonstrating for each other a very high level of humanity and helping each other solve problems. They're learning how to help each other confront and break through stuck places, deal with these coping habits. And when they do that, then they start behaving differently out there in the organization. And it starts trickling pretty rapidly down into the organization. My experience is that if you give me about, if you give me half of the top 10% of the people in a relatively large organization, we can shift the context of that organization in a year, year and a half. And then if they will backfill or do succession planning based on who practices and masters the leadership gift, they can cement that in the culture. So it's a very different way of thinking about culture change. Most people who do culture change, they dip all of the employees in some special long program, and they give the executives a little briefing. And I say, let's leave 80 or 90% of the people in the organization alone, and let's actually deal with the people who create the context for everybody else. So I can share this with you if you'd like. There's some success cases here. Here's a IT organization of 800 people. I worked with 40 people, and within 18 months, they had recouped all of their investment in the program, both in terms of people's time and real dollars, with just a few results. One is that their new managers became fully functional twice as fast as expected. The second is that they accelerated their delivery process by 3 to 5 months. And their engagement scores went up dramatically at a time where they were actually threatened with downsizing and had big organizational problems going on, and you would have expected the opposite. Here's another one. A CEO of a small company started working with me to bring responsibility into the entire organization. And he went from losing $1 million and almost $2 million a year on revenues of $4 million to net margins of 24.5% in an industry that has a norm of 2% margins. So he was getting margins 1,200% above the norm. And that's my experience with this. And he also sold the company for 10x when 3x would be a normal sale price. So that's my experience with this material. Is it's not a 10 or 20% improvement. It's 100% or 200% or 500% improvement available to you individually and to your team and to your organization if you start focusing on an effective way of dealing with the mindset and the culture. My belief is that it's 3 o'clock. Time up. Is that right? Okay, so I'm happy to stay around for a few minutes and answer some questions. I have a little handy pocket card of the responsibility process. If you'd like one, get one from me or Mark Bradley here also. See Mark, he'll get up and come around and you can get one from him. And if you're interested in a deep dive into mastering responsibility, the leadership gift for yourself, and learning how to teach it and coach it to others, there's going to be a workshop here in July called Leading and Coaching People to Take Responsibility and Demonstrate Ownership. I'll be back here July 26th. And there's a deal going on right now that you can get. And if you want to learn more about it, get one of these from me or one from Mark. And I'll stay around and answer your questions. So thank you very much. Oh, I told you, sorry, I told you that I would give you, told you I'd tell you where to download this. Here's where you download it. So go to my website and find the presentation archive, and it'll be there in about an hour. It's not there now, but I'll get it there. ChristopherAvery.com, to the resources section, and then to the presentation archive, and I'll give you all the documents that I showed you here today. Thanks.